So today I'm talking with Dr. Stephen Cook, who is the new CEO, 1 month old, I think, at the Melbourne Holocaust Museum. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And you come with a history, a career history in cultural heritage. What does that mean? So I mean, putting it on display, memorialising it, if you like. What does that mean?
So cultural heritage and museum studies is all about thinking about what we value about the past, but also about the way in which the past informs the present and the future. So one of the ways in which I got into the work that I'm doing is through very personal stories, actually. And I grew up in the UK.
Yes.
And back then, we had very heroic stories about Britain at war. And I had a granddad who was a minesweeper in the Mediterranean during the Second World War, and he told me really heroic stories about his experiences, but also very happy stories of turning 21 in Egypt and drinking whiskey out of teapots and driving up and down sand dunes in a VW Beetle. And my nan made planes, Halifax bombers, during the war. And again, she told me, stories about the White Cliffs of Dover and Dame Vera Lynn and all of those kind of very kind of mythologies about Britain at war.
Yes.
And I also knew that my next door neighbour had been in the British Army.
Right.
But he never talked about his experiences. And it was only after he died we found out he was one of the first people into Belsen.
Right.
After it was liberated.
Right.
And so I became absolutely fascinated with the stories we tell ourselves.
So you didn't hear his stories?
Didn't hear his stories. So fascinated by the stories we tell ourselves in families and communities and nations, and the stories we don't tell ourselves. So, and at that point, you didn't really hear much about the Holocaust in the UK.
No.
And so that...
And survivors generally, especially closer to the event, didn't talk about it much.
Didn't talk about it very much at all. So I became kind of fascinated by the places that we tell those stories, which are museums and memorials. So that started the 30-year journey, if you like, looking at museums, cultural heritage as places of storytelling, and about how we tell more kind of interesting, powerful, and more accurate stories about the past. And in particularly with the Holocaust and the Holocaust in the UK, we didn't tell those stories for a long time.
Yes.
And when we did talk about them, it was kind of, it was over there. It happened, on the continent, nothing to do with us. But it's got everything to do with us.
Yes.
In the same way that's got everything to do with Australia.
Yes.
And so, as I say, my work over the last 30 years has been trying to tell those stories in new and innovative ways.
And how do we do that about the Holocaust, especially when people are, I know in the mid-80s already, when this establishment's 40 years old now, people started to want to tell their stories, or some people wanted to say, this is important, the world needs to remember this happened. How do we do that in an effective way to